Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Like most of us, I have wished many things were taught to me in school that were not on the curriculum. While so much of what we need to learn can only be taught through experience, many skills that could be taught in school aren't. Please know I'm not faulting teachers or even the educational system. There is so much to be taught, and the laundry list of items could be endless. Yet, what are some of the things we needed to learn but didn't? My new friend, Mark Herschberg, answers that question in his excellent book, The Career Toolkit. Mark developed the material from 20 years of teaching MIT students all the things they need to know to succeed, but weren't taught, even at a top-tier institution. I wish that this book was available when I started my career, but I'm so glad it is available to my children. And I'm also grateful it's available to me, even at this stage in life. Mark is a graduate of MIT for both his undergraduate and master's degree, a seasoned startup expert, a successful CTO of various companies, and he has done all kinds of other cool things in his life, ranging from fighting cybercrime to becoming an award-winning ballroom dancer. So listen in as Mark and I talk about interview skills, negotiation skills, and of course, the skills that we all need as AI becomes more and more relevant. Mark Herschberg, a hearty welcome to Super Psyched.
Thanks so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
I am so happy you reached out to me to let me know of your work. It's everything I've needed to know for years. And having a son who is about to start college, it's the kind of material from which he can learn and derive a massive compounding return on investment over the years that he knows this information. It's not too late for me, and it's certainly just on time for him. I want to thank you for creating the Career Toolkit.
You're very welcome. It's certainly oriented to people roughly 20 to 40, but we've had people not just in that age range, even in their 40s, 50s, even some in their 60s who say, this is great. And boy, I wish I did have this 20, 30, 40 years ago. It would have been such a help. And we do have some more precocious high school students, people who are finishing high school, heading off to college, who use this as well, often with maybe help or guidance or at least recommendations from their parents to use this, because the tools like networking, you can apply that day one when you go off to college to get the most out of your college experience.
Just phenomenal. And somehow you have a nose to smell the chasms between what we need to know and what we actually know, what we learn in college versus what we actually learn. I'm wondering if you could give me the backstory about how you've been such a good detective to be able to find those gaps before we actually get into those gaps.
When you spend years living in the chasms, you become well aware of them. When I graduated MIT, I thought, hey, I'm a pretty smart guy. I've got these good degrees. And I always got to where I needed to be because I have a decent IQ. It was do well in high school. And I studied, I learned, I answered questions better than my peers. I got good grades. I went to college. Same thing happened. If you think about our education system, it is about memorizing knowledge and applying it. And that's why I did well. But when we get to the real world, it is a different set of skills. If you think about college, for example, the professor says, here is some homework. Here's a piece of paper. There are questions on it. Now, the catch is everything you need to answer that question is on the paper. The professor's not tricking you, saying, I didn't tell you this secret information. It's all there in front of you. What formula, what approach do you need to apply? Here's a hint. It's what you just did this past week in class. No one's tricking you. And what do you do with the answer? Stick in the little box on that piece of paper. It's a very well-defined problem. When we go into the real world and your boss says, make this happen, your boss might even say, make this happen by doing the following. That may or may not be the best way to do it. You may or may not have all the information you need. Your boss may not even know what all the information is or that there's more information out there and how you need to deliver it. When your boss says, get me a plan, okay, what's the plan? There's no box to put in a number. The plan might be do a presentation, might be do a report, a written report, might be have a budget and timeline. It's more open-ended questions. That's the real world. And that's not how we've trained people in school. So I very quickly learned, even though I could solve problems faster than other people, it wasn't always the right problem or delivered the right way. And that's where I was tripping up. And that's why I spent so much time down in those chasms where I started to say, what's going on here?
I love that. And many people would just be discouraged by those chasms. And instead, you got curious within those chasms and asked, what do I need to know here? How can I best teach myself and perhaps teach others? And that's what you've been doing for the last 20 years at MIT, teaching MIT students and perhaps graduates the skills that they will actually need in the real world, in addition to those foundational building blocks that they are paying to learn. What I'm wondering now is we are at a unique time. We just heard about ChatGPT. AI really seems to be on the rise. Moore's Law seems to be in effect in every which way with regard to changing topography of careers. I'm wondering, from your vantage point, as a man who's a chief technology officer, MIT educated, someone who's spent a lot of time in the trenches and even in cybersecurity, what do you imagine with the advent of AI are going to be the skills that we're going to need over the next 20 years? If you were to take a guess, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I'm wondering, given your knowledge base, what are the things that people really need to learn, whether they are just breaking into their careers or perhaps several years into their careers?
We're recording this in the summer of 2023 and getting a lot of questions from people on this. I've been consulting to a number of companies and speaking at companies and conferences about how AI is going to impact our jobs, our companies, our careers. We can look at history for some guidance. Now, there's two trends we see. First, let's look at the Industrial Revolution. That was an interesting change because before the Industrial Revolution, if you could turn screws faster than I could, you had an advantage.
Yeah.
If you were bigger and stronger than me, you had an advantage. But once we went to power tools, it didn't matter that you were bigger and stronger and faster because now the power tool made us all equal. And so the advantage in physical labor was no longer, are you just faster or better at the rote tasks, but rather the advantage, could you do more complex things? If you think of someone cutting wood, well, the circular saw can do that as easily for me as for you. But if you're a master wood carver, there's some additional value that it can't replicate. Now, if we look at AI, it is the equivalent, but in white collar or thinking jobs. In my earlier days, I was a pretty good coder. I could write code, I think slightly better quality or faster than some of my peers. Let's suppose I was 30% faster. Well, now with AI tools, maybe not quite today, but if not today, certainly in the next year or two, ChatGPT or its equivalents will let people write code better than I could. And so whether I was better than you or you were better than me, we can all write basic code equally fast, and the better coders lose their advantage. Now, I'm picking coding, but really it could be accounting, it could be marketing, it could be writing marketing copy and creating campaigns. All of a sudden, we are all equalized by these tools. So the advantage comes to that higher level work. In software, to continue with that example, it's not, can you ingest this data and write some scraper? It's, we have to partner with some third-party tool, and we have to think about there's three options. What's the cost metrics look like today and in the future as we project out usage? Where might it scale well or not as well as we think through our business strategy and how this might evolve? That's something that AI probably won't do as well. And so just like labor, we have shifted from cutting wood and turning screws, which went from power tools to now full robotic automation. So too will we see in marketing, in accounting, in software, in many of these areas. The base skills will be equalized and then automated away, and we need to focus on the higher level functionality. Now, I'll give one other example from history that will help guide us. We've seen time and again, capitalism and innovation destroy jobs and create jobs. 200 some years ago, we all would have been farmers because that's what America was. And we destroyed the farm jobs through the Industrial Revolution, through the steam engine. Thankfully, that lets us do things like this podcast. But that transition took place, the loss of farm jobs took place over a century. So as farms started to need less manpower, people could move to the cities where the new jobs were, and we had time for that transition. We've had faster transitions lately. You and I are old enough to remember toll booth collectors. They were annoying. You always had to slow down. You had to pay the toll booth. We started to replace them. I remember New Jersey Turnpike, you throw in the 35 cents.
I remember that.
That's robotic automation. And now, of course, we have the electronic passes. And within a relatively short time, we replaced most of the humans. And when I say replace, we got rid of their jobs. They couldn't move to another state and find the job. Their jobs were gone. Now, those people had a bad experience from innovation. Their careers were over. We as a society said, you know what? On the whole, this is good. I know for 10,000 or so people, that's problematic. Sorry about that. But for the rest of us, we're saving so much time. This is worth it. But those 10,000 people, we as a society need to replace them and find them new jobs and careers. And we can do that with 10,000 people. The challenge, 10,000 people over a couple of years, the challenge is when it's 3 million people over 3 years. Our economy is not yet set up to transition that many people into new careers that quickly. This is going to be the big challenge. This is a problem not for any individual or company. This is a societal challenge where we as a society, government, and our educational systems need to create a rapid response system to help people being displaced rapidly transition into the newer jobs that will be created from these new technologies.
This is a little bit terrifying because this is entirely unprecedented. The speed, the volume, the potential sociological calamities that accompany these moving parts. And I'm wondering, given your knowledge, if you had the ability to throw out a recommendation that would help the 3 million people who will probably be losing their jobs, what would that recommendation be?
I think from industries and the government, we need guidance on where we see the upcoming jobs, and we need programs, training programs that people can go into. Now, we know some of these will be in artificial intelligence. Some of these will be in advanced electronics. By the way, we're talking primarily white-collar jobs. We continue in the US today in 2023 to have a shortage of skilled laborers to do the manufacturing we need and that we'd have to onshore for various geopolitical and national security reasons. So we have a blue-collar shortage. We will have a shortage of white-collar workers as well. So we're going to have to create training programs to fill that gap. And when I say training programs, by the way, that's one piece of it. There might be other societal changes. Just as an example, we may decide the equivalent of Pell Grants for some of these programs should apply. It might not be college, but it's an advanced training program. It might be 6 months or 12 months. And we might want to say there will be federal funding for this. We might want to create rules saying if you go to this program, there is some, let's say, pause on your mortgage. I'm not necessarily advocating that, but we need to think about it from a societal standpoint because this is going to be so pervasive and disruptive that we need to find ways to support people throughout this transition that's going to happen for decades to come.
You know, I'm going to talk about the only mathematical equation that you address in your book, and that is a rectangle that is 4 feet by 10 feet. And you asked if you wanted to increase the total area of this rectangle, which side would you want to increase? And of course, the answer is the 4-foot one. Increasing it by 2 feet on either side will have a bigger effect if the shorter portion of the rectangle is increased. It will be 60 feet instead of 48 feet. I'm wondering for the people who are entering the workforce, for those who are perhaps more deeply entrenched in the workforce, what would be tantamount to that 2-foot increase on the proper dimension? What are the skills that you would endorse a person learning so that they are more ready for the changes that are yet to come?
The reason I use this analogy is to recognize we all have short sides and long sides. Now, we often focus on our long sides. As a technologist, I keep abreast of new technology. If I don't, I become a dinosaur. So I try to make that 10 feet, 12, 14, and so on. But we recognize that things outside of our domain, that short side, need to be improved. And in the book, I talk about all these skills being short side. So the classic example, because it still applies to this group, and then we'll talk about more specific things, is, for example, that technologist who is wonderful at coding or technical problems, but can't communicate at all.
Right.
Just not stand in front of a group or runs down rabbit holes or gets way too technical and loses everyone. And if you make that person just slightly better at communicating, not that they're ready for the TED stage,
Right.
but more effective in communicating, all of a sudden they are more effective in doing their job. We do know as automation increases, human interaction, communication, networking, team building, relationships, those will all be more important to our jobs. So certainly we do want to focus on those skills that unfortunately are not being taught in school. But then we can look at other areas related to even just basic AI. Now it's more of a classic STEM skill, but we're all going to be using AI in our jobs one way or another, and just understanding it, just like we all had to learn computers 20 years ago, because you are going to be using emails and spreadsheets and then files in the cloud. Regardless of your job, you need to learn to do that.
Definitely.
The same will apply to AI. That's going to be a core part of any job you're doing. So start to pick up some of those skills as well, or you will be left behind.
I think that's really important. And even Warren Buffett, the great investor who was asked, what is your best investment of all time? He didn't even blank. He said it was learning public speaking skills. So to your point, the idea of communicating well will remain relevant. And I'm really heartened to hear that. And I'm wondering, what are some of your favorite tips that people don't necessarily learn in their academic careers that would really act as caulking in making a more solid wall? What are some of your favorite little nuggets?
There are so many in the book. In fact, I think when I pulled it out, there are 398 specific tips in the book. It's a lot. And that's why we have
it's mind blowing. And it's so easy and delightful to read, by the way.
Thank you. It ranges and it will be different for different people, but let's just pick out a few. I'll pick 3 obvious ones.
Yeah.
That are so obvious you've probably overlooked it. Because leadership, we've all heard, leadership, that's important. Networking, yes, it's not who you know, or it's not what you know, it's who you know. We've all heard these. Let's start with career plans. This seems like 101, so obvious. Most people, their career plan is, well, I'm here and I hope in 5 years to be there. That's the entire plan. That's it. I hope to one
I
day.
hope. What a great strategy. I hope.
And it was one of the saints, I quote him in the book, hope is not a strategy.
Right.
Now, if we think about our career, if our boss says, here's a key project, you've got 1 year to do it. This is 30% of our company's revenue, make it happen. You don't say, okay, boss, I'll see you in a year, cross your fingers, let's hope I do it.
Sorry, we're getting walking papers on that one.
Right. You need to say, okay, I have a plan. Here's the plan. I got input on the plan from other people. We know whatever plan I lay out day one isn't going to work exactly as planned, but that's okay. We're going to do check-ins and we're going to revise. And that doesn't guarantee success, but that minimizes the risk of failure. We can apply the same strategy to our careers, and yet all these brilliant people who do this every day in their jobs do not.
How is that actually done? How is that put into play? How do we actually create more of a plan? Just again, I'm not expecting a full course on it, but what are some things a person might do to get the process started?
Very simple, just like in our work. Now we say, if I have to deliver this project in 12 months, where do I need to be in 11 months or 10 months? Okay, if that's where I need to be, where do I need to be? We backtrack. Same thing in the career. If you want to be, let's say, I'm going to use size of team as an example, just because it's easy to illustrate. If I want to manage a team of 100 people, because whatever title, VP, whatever, manages 100 people, I'll be there in 10 years. And today I'm managing 5 people. No one's going to say, well, you've done okay with 5, go right to 100. Before I manage 100, I need to manage 60, 70, 80 people. And maybe that's a director level or associate VP or whatever. And before you're at that level, you need to manage maybe 20 or 30 people, maybe before that 10 people. So we can backtrack and say, if that's where I want to be in 10 years, here's where I'm going to aim to be in 2 or 3, and then 5 to 6. And again, what trips people up, they say, well, how do I know what I'm going to be doing in 5 years? How do you know what's going to happen on this project on day 273? You don't. You have a placeholder. It's fuzzier the further out, but the key thing is you revise it. So here's something you can do this second. I'm going to ask you to pause this podcast. You're going to have to come back to it. pause the podcast, create a calendar event in your phone saying, think about my career, and set that as a recurring event for every 6 months. So a recurring 6-month calendar event, think about my career. And now you're back to the podcast. And what you've just done is you have now put something on so you never go more than 6 months without doing a check-in on your career plan and the revisions that you need for it.
I love that so much. And I will tell you straight up, I remember my father, who has been a very instrumental voice in my own life, asked me several years ago, where do you want to be 5 years from now? I was a newly minted psychologist. I found the question terrifying. I felt those butterflies, and I knew he was asking the right question. But summoning up the gumption, the courage to even begin to address the answer to that provocative question was difficult for me to really give voice to, but I did. I'm so grateful that he asked that question. It was the right time. It was the right question, of course. It gave me a target. I would say that I've hit the target, and I keep invited that question many times from various people in my life. Ask me where I want to be, and I ask them where they want to be. And there's something really beautiful about having a nice group of people who are cheering for you from the sidelines and for whom you can cheer as well. So I really am a big fan of both social support as well as the perception of that social support, even after the support has occurred, just knowing that they are in your corner. And I realize also that I cut you off in a manner of speaking, asking you to geek out and explain, operationalize the plan. You said you had 2 other really cool ideas, and I'd love to hear what the other 2 would be out of those 398. Again, folks, you got to read the book. You're going to love it.
Let's take one from chapter 3, interviewing. Now, most people say, oh, I've learned about interviewing because our college career services taught us how to interview. You can do a web search and find all sorts of things. How do you answer? What's your weakness? How do you answer this interview question? Now, here's the thing. Most of us are involved in hiring other people. We're interviewing from the other side of the table. And most of us have had 0 training in how to do it. Imagine if you said to your 16-year-old kid, hey, listen, you're 16 now, so you're ready to drive. So I'm going to hand you the keys. So here you go. Here are the keys. Good luck. Try not to hurt it.
What could possibly go wrong?
And yet, what do we say? Oh, welcome to the company. You've been here 2 weeks. Got a new candidate to interview. You've seen how interviews are done. Yeah, I remember you sat in one where I interviewed you. So here's the keys to interview room. Good luck. Try not to hurt anyone. That's what we do.
100%, by the way, having spent nearly 2 decades in the corporate world, that's exactly how it works, or doesn't work.
And then think about the fact that in our white collar jobs, what is the main ingredient? What's the key driver of success? It is our people. And we're just having this haphazard selection process.
Totally.
In a restaurant, it is the senior chef, or maybe one right below the senior chef, who goes out and selects the food, the ingredients, the most important part of the meal. You don't leave that to the junior chefs. You leave it to people who have had experience and who have had some training and guidance, because that's going to impact the quality of the food. And yet we just throw people in and say, well, good luck. Even in the big companies, we know big organizations in tech and finance elsewhere, they do have some formal training programs. And I very much commend them for it. Even though I'm not going to name names, but I have spoken to people in those organizations. I'll talk about some of the challenges they have with the interviewing process, because it doesn't always look for the right things. But any training we do at all puts us head and shoulders above every other company out there, because they're doing nothing. So we need to be more intentional in our hiring. And by the way, once you understand it from that side of the table, you become a much better candidate when you go and interview for your next job.
100% agreed, by the way. Having done 120 corporate interviews in my life, approximately, that was my best estimation. There's no question that from both providing the interview and from seeing what landed with me versus what was missing from that interview, I became a better interviewer and a better interviewee. I'm sure that's
exactly.
The same. Yeah.
Everyone should go through that. Now, the third area, this is from chapter 2, working effectively. This is a combination of skills we don't even talk about. Again, we talk about leadership and networking, and these are terms we've all heard. But then there's this other set of skills. We talked about some of this earlier, how in school we have a very clear problem and a place to put the answer, but that's not how it works in the real world. And knowing the right question to ask, knowing how to manage your manager. Here's a simple example. Your manager wants ideas from the team. Oh, good. I've got a manager. She's going to listen to me. I want to give her input. Should you say, hey, I'm going to stop by your office or maybe schedule an appointment. I'm going to pitch you my idea. Or should you send her an email writing it up? Because there are people who say, I don't like long emails, just come talk to me. And then there are people who say, write it down first, let me go through it, then we can talk about it. And both are completely valid. But if you aren't clear what your manager prefers, you could wind up annoying her. This is a trivial example, but this concept applies not just with our manager, with all sorts of people, with how we engage with them, how they like to be engaged, what's the right way to address them. And so skills like this, skills like understanding corporate culture, understanding corporate politics, these are the things that can trip you up. No matter how good you are at your job, we think we're playing this game where it's just score points by answering questions. But there's this whole other dimension we rarely, if ever, talk about that can make us more successful or trip us up. And we have to understand this game. We have to understand the rules, which are going to be different from company to company. And we never even discuss it in school.
What I love about what you're doing here, whether it's answering my questions or having written the Career Toolkit, is that these skills aren't static. They bleed into all of life. They're not just career skills. The ability to know how to communicate with your boss, if they are the type who like it in writing versus the type who want to just spitball it verbally. These bleed into our romantic relationships, our friend relationships, our ability to raise our children, the ability to hit a target based on our knowledge of their preferences. And those can be honed at work, but the ROI doesn't stop there. It continues at home. It continues in so many other avenues of our life. Even as you're negotiating perhaps with a bureaucrat, if you come to realize this is a person who cares about thinking only, and I'm not going to use feeling terms, they only care about the facts. Or if you're talking to somebody who might be another gatekeeper and they are more feeling based, being able to address them just based on a blank, like this person appears based on the way they're speaking to be more likely to connect with me if I use feeling terms. And obviously we wouldn't want to use those feeling terms with the bureaucrat, and we wouldn't want to use the thinking terms with the other gatekeeper. These career advice tips really, really bleed into so many areas. I'm just so grateful to you for having created it. I'm wondering, you've done so many things with your life. You are a fascinating individual. You're kind of like the Dos Equis guy, the most fascinating man in the world. One of your interesting Jedi skills is that you are a very seasoned ballroom dancer. And one of the things I tell people who I work with is, especially if they're parents of athletes, that the athletics are not the goal in and of themselves. It's looking at the athletics as places from which we can really learn, like squeeze all of the toothpaste out of the tube after your child wins or loses, or has a good at bat or a bad at bat, or whatever is going on. And I'm wondering, has ballroom dancing served as learning beyond the ballroom itself?
It certainly has. Coincidentally, my very first national championships was in San Jose. Wonderful event. And it's funny you asked that because MIT's Alumni Magazine recently did an article on me on this very topic, ballroom dancing skills on and off the floor. And I actually use ballroom as an example. Ballroom dancing made me a better public speaker. Here's how it did so. Public speaking, for most of us, we understand the basics. Project your voice, vary your tone a bit, make eye contact with the audience, know your speech, don't memorize your speech. Okay, got the basics. Not the hard part. For most people, there is an element of fear. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. I still get a little bit of that nervousness when I walk out on a stage. I've done it countless times. I've done it in front of countless people, but there's always that little nervousness there. And the nervousness is just, you could probably explain this better than I can because of your training and background. It's that fear, maybe from childhood, the I'm going to embarrass myself, I'm going to do something bad. When you are a competitive ballroom dancer, you are out on the dance floor and you are literally being judged.
You could not, you know that Jerry Seinfeld joke when you're on a nude beach, you basically have to say, yep, this is me. This is all there is. And when you're ballroom dancing, it's like, yep, this is me. That's all there is.
That's it. And you are going to screw up. And you're going to screw up even though the judge was staring right at me as I did that. Damn it. Well, it is what it is. And I have plenty of competition. I have screwed up many times and it's okay. Like one of the things I love about ballroom dancing, Very rarely does a couple ever fall, but once in a while it's a crowded floor, someone trips over someone, especially with the women's, their skirts can sometimes be long. Every once in a while we'll see a couple trip. Ballroom dancing, and I remember this happened actually at the San Jose Championship. I think two couples collided, one got knocked down, the other couple actually stopped dancing. You're only being judged, you have 90 seconds to impress the judges. The other couple even stopped, helped up the couple on the floor, and then everyone applauds for the couple as they get up. Because everyone in the audience is saying, hey, you know what? We're with you. We've all been there. We've all had problems. It's okay. We're behind you. I love that about the ballroom.
That's beautiful. I love that story. But keep going. What else have you learned from ballroom dancing?
So I've screwed up and I've gotten through it. And that has given me the confidence that when I go up on stage and I screw up, I can remember, you know what? They're not laughing at me. I was doing a presentation actually for my class at MIT that I've been teaching for years. And I was covering for someone else. This guy, his flight couldn't make it. It was not my presentation. But as one of the more seasoned instructors, they said, well, you've got seniority. You've seen this more than other people. You cover it. Okay, great. And a couple slides in, the AV died. And I didn't know the slides well enough because they weren't mine that I could just do it off the top of my head. There were also some visual slides that actually needed to see it to do it. Now, for some people, that would be, oh my God, this is so embarrassing.
I've had it happen to me, actually. It's not great.
Nervousness.
Totally.
But I reminded myself, no one's looking at me and blaming me and saying, Mark, you're a screw up. Now, if this was some presentation, this was my equipment, maybe, but this was MIT's equipment.
Totally.
And even then, we know these things happen. And have that calmness with me and say, okay, these things happen. In fact, that became a great teaching moment for the students about these things happen. What are you thinking about me right now? Are you thinking Mark's an idiot? No. Okay, so remember this. When you're on stage and something goes wrong and you knock over the mic stand or spill your water, the audience isn't going to think that of you either. And by these little things, we can build up that confidence. As ballroom, for many years of being out there, good and bad, built up my confidence. I can carry that with me into my public speaking.
And you used what was in the room. Yesterday, I was talking to a Japanese psychology expert, and one of the things he was telling me about was the importance of tea ceremony and only talking. I didn't know this, but you actually can talk during tea ceremony, but you can only talk about what is transpiring in the room at this time. So it's a mindfulness drill. Mindfulness, which sounds kind of esoteric, is really just being aware of what's going on while it's going on. And what you did was you tapped into what's going on in the room. How can this be gristful for the mill, for the students? And how can I maximize this lesson in a way that will be memorable? And you immediately zeroed in on what's happening and how can they use this in the future, because it will happen to them. It just does. That's fantastic, Mark.
And this, it goes back to sports. When you think about learning sports, you build muscle memory. When you're first trying the sport, you're overthinking everything. We see this in ballroom. Everyone's concentrating on what do I do? But you build up muscle memory. And then once you do that, you can focus higher order. In ballroom, you're not worried about the physical step. You're now engaged with the musicality. If you think about sports, it's not how do I throw to first base, but you're thinking, do I want to throw to first or second based on the current situation? Once I know which base to do, and I can focus my mentality there, then I can do the mechanics without thinking. And this is true for all these other skills. When it comes to speaking or leadership or negotiating or networking, once we build that confidence and that muscle memory, then in the middle of negotiation, when I get thrown a curveball, I don't have to say, oh my God, this is not what I thought. And what do I do now? I can go to that higher order. Is this the direction we want to go in? Do I want to shift that direction? When interviewing, and this applies, doing lots of podcasts has made this helpful as well, though I've done plenty of interviews on both sides of the table. How do I not just answer the question, guide the conversation to where I want to go to put myself in the best light? And this comes from not just, oh my God, how do I answer the question? But I can answer this question. Now let me get to that meta level that you're talking about to go to the next step.
Yeah, it was interesting for me to hear your thoughts about ballroom dancing because they are so consistent with the 2 years I spent doing improv. And so much of what I learned there has helped me in my presentations, in my interviews, in virtually every facet of life, certainly parenting my 2 sons. So I can see how when we play a sport, when we engage in a hobby and activity, that there can be, if we really allow it to, if we ask ourselves the right question, where else can this apply? Where else might this skill set be useful? Or where else have I seen myself use it? We really derive a much greater return on our investment of time. Before I get to my last question, I do want to ask you a question about interviewing because you are so good at it. And I know you're an introvert who is able to really, really summon up this energy so that you can appear kind of like Bill Gates, another introvert who Susan Cain talks about, or Craig of Craigslist. You can appear extroverted because you have so much conviction about what you're doing. And I believe that's part of why you're able to rock 250 podcast interviews. But I'm wondering if you could talk about interviewing itself. What are the skills that a person going for a job really needs to have on board when they are going through the interviewing process?
I'll answer that and they'll give you the secret to that confidence. It's important to look at from the other side of the table, as I mentioned, we talk about in the book, and ask yourself, what is it they're looking for? Yes, they say they want knowledge of this or experience with that, but really they're saying, I have a certain job and I need someone to achieve it. How do you convince them you can do this? Now, some of that might be, well, I've done that in my past job for the last 5 years. Here's proof. Okay, that's strong evidence. Some of it can be, ask me technical questions. I don't just mean software, about your discipline, and I will show you I have the knowledge. That gets a little harder when we get to management because it's less about technical knowledge and it's about fuzzier things. And interviews, by the way, trip people up on the hiring side a lot more than individual contributor interviews. It's understanding what are their concerns and working to address that. And this goes to what we talked about earlier, that it's not just responding to your question, but steering it in the direction they feel we need to go, either because there's an aspect of me you haven't asked about, but I think it's important to convey, so I want to lead us in that direction, or there's a concern, and I think you have it, you haven't said. Now, some people say, by the way, do you have any extra concerns about me or anything in my candidacy that you'd like me to address? Some interviewers will answer it. Some will just go, no, even though they have some. Don't always expect a direct answer, but learning to sense that by looking at what are the questions being asked, what do you know about the company, and then diving into what you perceive as the concern or the gap and addressing that, even if not directly asked.
I love that. And one of the things you're asking the listener to do is to really dial into the empathy, listen for the message behind the question. Don't just answer the question as a stenographer would want it reported in court, but really, really ask yourself, what does this mean?
And this is true on both sides of the interview table.
For sure.
Now, I said I'll give you the secret to how I get the confidence. This comes from my friend, Olivia Fox-Caban.
Love her.
She wrote an amazing book.
In fact, I got to tell you straight up, and to the listeners, in 2014, when my wife and I read The Charisma Myth, it was by far our favorite book of the year. And we read a lot of books. I listen to about 2 to 3 books a week on average. So that Olivia's was that high ranking. Anyway, well, I'm all ears.
It is an amazing book. I recommend it to everyone. The Charisma Myth.
I've given it out more than almost any book I've given out.
She talks about effectively running a movie script. I forget if that's the term she uses. That's now how I explain it to others. Think about the following. When you sit in a movie theater and you're watching a horror movie, your heart starts to race. Your mind knows that killer with the knife can't get you. But at a subconscious level, you see bad person with a knife and your body reacts physiologically to it. Because that's how we were trained. Because when you go back thousands of years, person with knife, if you didn't react that way, you stood around and you got killed and you didn't have kids. And that's why we're here, because our ancestors did that. We're designed to react that way.
Right.
But you can run it not just to be scared of movies, but to give yourself other feelings. Before I would go into an interview, and Olivia talks about having these positive memories. For me, I think about the cat I had growing up. And when I go into an interview, I use this sometimes before I step on stage or in other ways where I need to be in the right mindset. I imagine just petting my cat, hugging my cat. I love that cat so much. And just closing my eyes, imagining what it feels like to pet the cat, you will change your physiology and put yourself in that warm state, in this case, this warm, positive state. When I walk into the interview, I am now projecting this warmth and positivity that the interviewer hopefully will pick up on. And we're going to put ourselves into a warm framework or at least I'm going to be in that state, even if I can't control how the interviewer reacts, but I'm going to be in the right state for the interview and not go in with the, oh my God, I'm going to screw up the interview, or there is some psycho with a knife who's going to kill me. It's, hey, this is just like hanging out with my cat and I am excited to be here and do this.
That is such a great hack. Love it so much. One of the ones that I actually recommend is cueing yourself almost like Dwight Schrute in The Office with your walk-on song. I know Dwight had some kind of major heavy metal song, but I think we need to have a walk-on song, frankly. But I think the image of putting yourself in that psychological state, imagining, we know that the occipital lobe in our brain, the visual part of our brain, is massive. I don't know what percentage of the brain it occupies, but well over 20%. And when we see a cue, whether it's a cute kitten there's a reason why on YouTube they're the most popular, but a cute kitten, if we see a horror movie, these are really evocative and we have a physiological response. And I love that you're leveraging the real estate of the brain's visual cortex to allow yourself to feel what you need to feel so that you can deliver what you need to deliver in that moment. So that's a great hit.
If the song is the way you do it, I gave one example.
I think both. They're not mutually exclusive. I think you can do both.
And this, by the way, is why we created the Brain Bump app, so that you can get that advice right when and where you need it to remember to do things like this in a timely fashion.
Brilliant. Which an app I have downloaded. I'm going to get to my final question, Mark, and that is this. If you had the magical powers to confer upon all humanity one insight or skill that would dramatically improve the lives of humans individually and perhaps even collectively, what would that skill or insight be? And how do you imagine it would impact the lives of individuals and perhaps society at large?
I'm torn between two.
Bring them both. You're just giving you the ability to do both of them.
The one I think about in the context of our profession, I read this in a book. I unfortunately can't remember the book that gave me this idea. It might be from Peopleware, I think, which is another fantastic book. Peopleware by Tom DeMarco and Timothy Lister, is the power to see ourselves as others see us, to know how we are perceived. Because once I understand how you perceive me, it becomes so much easier to recognize where there may be a gap in how you see me versus how I see me. And this is at the root of certain conflicts. The other facet of this, which is perhaps more powerful in a general good for humanity way, is just the power of empathy, the power to be in someone else's shoes and understand their experience and how they perceive the world. And I think that would make us all a lot more accommodating to each other.
Mark, beautiful. May it be so. And I want to thank you for sharing your wisdom with my listeners. It has been so fun to geek out with you just now, and can't wait to see what people have to say about learning from you on this episode. This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psych. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe